Welcome to the Church Resource, where we talk about the best resources for pastors, leaders, and lay people. I'm your host, Jeff Oliver, looking at a book today that was thrust into my hands, and someone says you have to read this book. It is called The Magna Carta of Humanity, Sinai's Revolutionary Faith and the Future of Freedom. It's written by Guinness, who is a frequent social commentator. He really does a great job just in general of looking at the world as it is and looking at it through the lens of Scripture, looking to see how today's events stack up and just how our culture stacks up with the Bible. This is one of the books that, frequently people ask me, well, what do you do on that podcast? What's it about? I'll say, well, there are pastors who very often, they're bivocational. They could be leading a church of probably fewer than 100. That's most churches in America. And another great chunk of churches within the 100 to 200 people range. So it's for that, but it is for that pastor who is very busy keeping up with the demands of that kind of church and a bivocational, and usually with a family, and also who very often has somebody come to him and say, Pastor, you have to read this book. This is a great book. I just read it. You have to look at it. And or goes to a pastor's conference and gets a stack of books. I remember coming back from conferences with an armload of books, 5, 6, sometimes 10 books that we just have to look at today as soon as possible. So this is one of those books that somebody put into my hands. Hey, you have to read this book. You have to take a look at it. And so I have finally taken this book off my shelf, admittedly blew the dust off, and then had to take a look at it. And I was really encouraged and I was fascinated by reading this book. I wish I had read it sooner. So that's my plug for the book, and I'm going to recommend it right up front here. But let me tell you what it's about as well. So Os Guinness is, he digs into the foundations, the principles, the histories of the cultural and political divide in America. Now, if you just tuned out because we said political, I want to tell you, he is very fair, very balanced. I think, I know that's the logo for a news network. Didn't mean to do that, but he is very balanced. He even talks about the MAGA, the Make America Great Again kind of slogan, and all of these slogans that come from the left, come from the right, and come from people who are trying to mediate that, which there are not many these days. They're either stacked up on the left or stacked up on the right. But he does talk about this in a very fair way, and in a way that is, I think, is not off-putting to people. So I just want to let you know that up front too. This is talking about the culture. This is talking about our social state of affairs more so than it is political. Although political is going to inform some of that and even drive some of that. So what he's saying is that we have to understand what made America great in the first place if we're going to talk about making it better, making it what it ought to be, making the nation, making our laws and our political leaders serve at the behest of the country as they should. Where were we in terms of how we started? 1776, kind of taking a look at that period in history. Where were we? And so he's saying that these are the ideals that founded America, and he works through those. He talks about all of those, and he says that people have to fully understand the ideals, the principles that we were founded on, and that kind of contrasted with the principles that another revolution that was going on across the Atlantic Ocean in France, and how that started, and how that came to be, and how that turned out, and what it has done to shape that country today, even until this day. So he contrasts 1776, the American Revolution, 1789, the French Revolution. And he states that, they both have the term revolution in them, but they were very different. The word revolution is probably about the only similarity that we could find in those two incidents, those two periods of history in the world. So he says that the division in the USA is due to two mutually exclusive views of freedom. And so he says the first was from from Exodus. This is what he calls the freedom of Sinai. But then there's the freedom that was promised in the French Revolution from Paris. So he, again, contrasts 1776, 1789, Sinai, Paris. Those are the themes and the kind of two tracks that he runs on throughout this book to be able to make those contrasts. And again, not a lot of comparisons, not a lot of things that are similar, but a lot of contrasts to that. So that he makes the point that the freedom of Sinai is not self-sustaining, and the way forward is that we ought to have love, that we ought to have forgiveness for each other. That is the God-centered revolution that we need to get back to. We need to have another revolution that would really just center us back to what our original revolution was in the United States. And so that is one of love and forgiveness that he highlights. Jesus, of course, in leading that revolution or continuing that revolution, if we're talking about Sinai. Even Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was a big part of that, and doing that in a way that was peaceful, yet and also nonviolent, but in a way that was revolutionary. The contrast then is the way forward, he says, proposed by Paris in that 1789 revolution. And what happens today from the progressive left, he said that they're operating more out of that kind of Parisian revolution that is driven by hate and revenge. We have to get one up on somebody else. We have to do better than somebody else at all costs. It's not a drive for success, it's a drive for revenge. And so he says that America is currently in the process of switching from the ideals of 1776 to the ideals of 1789. And we will suffer the same fate, he says, as all other nations that have tried in numerous ways to do that, including Russia, China, and so forth. So I just wanted to let you know about a couple of quotations from the book, actually just one that's a good chunk of a quotation, so it is a little bit long, but I think it's going to be helpful to understand this book. He says, the United States is suffering from profound philosophical cynicism, moral corruption, and serious social collapse. Too many Americans, he says, especially those who are younger, have already been bewitched by the ideals coming from the other revolution, 1789, and not 1776. And now they appear hell-bent on rejecting ideas from their past, which they have not tried to understand, even as they embrace ideas from the other revolution, and really have not examined it. Many Americans see their ancestors' errors and at once think that makes them wiser and better than their ancestors, and they do not try to understand, but rather will go forward with a Parisian type of revolution, that 1789 that he talks about. I think this is a needed book. I think it's one that many ought to be reading, and one that I would recommend for you to take a look at. And it's pretty thick reading. It's kind of heady reading, but it's done in short chunks, smaller chapters, so that you can take that, go think about it, and even work through it, maybe read it along with someone else, I think, to be able to talk about these ideas together. Well, this is Os Guinness, the Magna Carta of humanity, Sinai's revolutionary faith and the future of freedom. And it's one book on my shelf that's been very helpful to me. I hope it gives you some direction as you prayerfully consider which resources will best help you and the people you minister to. Thanks for listening to The Church Resource. Please make sure you give us a review. And if you have any suggestions of resources that you would like us to look at, email us at thechurchresource@gmail.com. That's thechurchresource@gmail.com.